Welcome to Wisdom Work, where we talk to people who are integrating their work selves with their spiritual journey. I am your host, Quinita Robertson. I work with the divine feminine to bring forgiveness and reconciliation to the world. I earn more than I want doing what I love in service to the highest good. In this podcast, we ask the question, which do you choose, change or transformational growth? The choice is yours. This choice will make the difference. This choice has the power to move you from stuck to inspired, from pain to joy, isolation to community, theory to practice, and from ordinary living to extraordinary living. I'm excited today to have a friend, a minister, an author, and a person who I actually got to visit recently in his home, which I think is wonderful, Daniel Cooperrider. And I wanted to invite him into this call. He completed a book called Speak with the Earth and It Will Teach You. And it's a field guide to the Bible. And I've just loved this book. I think it's poetry in nature, I always say. I think that it really connects the two for me. And it's not a book of just poems. It's a book that he wrote about different elements and focused on through connections with spirit and the earth. And Daniel, I wanted you here and I wanted to just speak a little bit about how you integrate your work self with your spiritual self. And one of the things I want to say from being in your home, I got to witness you living it. And so there's so many ways that I've seen it, but I want to know, how you would say that shows up and also anything else you'd want to tell us about who you are.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Quinita. It's such a delight and joy to get to have this time with you and to see where this conversation will take us. Thank you for your kind words about my book. There are actually no poems in it, but it was intentionally very poetically written. Hopefully, a lot of thought went into that aspect of it. Yeah, I love your question about integrating work and spiritual life. The question finds me at a unique point in my journey because I am a pastor, but and I served in the local congregation for about 10 years. But the last 2.5 years, I've been expanding my notion of work which includes a lot of at-home stuff, domestic stuff. I've got a 2.5-year-old that I love getting to go on adventures with, and it was so special to get you to meet our little Reverie. And so, but at the same time, my creative calling and sense of integrating spirituality with my work has only that flame has only gotten bigger over the last 2.5 years while I haven't been pastoring a local congregation. I would describe that spirituality as what you wake up and want to give your attention to throughout the day. To me, attention is a real key concept, and as it is for many poets and thinkers. But for me, attention is one of the greatest gifts we can give one another, and it's one of the greatest gifts we can give back to the world. The world, gives us everything. Grace abounds, and the very least we could do is, open our eyes and pay attention and be present to the wonder of the world. So for me, my spirituality and work grounds in that attention, but that's just a first step. Other steps for me, I think about, the world being so beautiful and full of life and agony and suffering and joy and beauty and possibility. So the first point is to be attentive and present, but we also have to bring intention and intentionality. So I think about noticing the world, but then also highlighting it, like bringing your yellow highlighter marker. We have to kind of add some emphasis to it, or bring even more attention, magnify what we see. And then at our best moments, we can move on to another step of maybe participating with the co-creative energies of the universe, the source of life, to bring forth maybe the type of art or offering that is uniquely ours. So that's been sort of what I've been trying to do with this, with the book project that's now about a half a year old, about 6 months old. Yeah. So that's sort of where I'm finding myself.
I love that, Bill Plotkin, one of the things he wrote about in his book Soulcraft is he wrote about the difference between the journey to spirit, which he speaks to as an ascending journey, the collective we, or the journey to soul, which he talks about as a descending journey. It's a journey to self, it's a meeting your individual self. And what I see in this book is I actually see both playing out in your book. I see you speaking about, of course, with the earth, the connection to all and the whole and how we're all connected, as well as this individual journey into yourself. One of the things I loved, there's a piece in it that you talk about how we often think of gravity as a pull down, but it actually is pulling us to the center of the earth and it's a pull in. And that's a thing that I think that we are lacking actually in this culture is so much of our attention has been outward instead of inward. And so, how would you say you see those two different things playing out in this book, maybe in your life as well?
Yeah, thank you. So that that concept of the we and the spirit we and the soul self, um, where it takes me with this book is one of the, I wouldn't call it a duality, but kind of two different modes of relating to the world that I feel called to and I feel are productive and helpful, which I tried to get at with this book is on the one hand, I feel the call to radical particularity, learning the names of the certain wildflower, the oxeye daisy, the purple coneflower, getting very minute and specific, a strong focus on the individual thing, and that could be the individual self as well, getting a strong sense of who you are and what your voice is, and um, but then so that's one movement, and then there's another movement which I think is equally important and sometimes more important is to keep widening your sense of perspective and your sense of focus, widening it all the way to the point where those distinctions between things don't matter anymore. And it's more the sense of the whole and how things are integrated into the whole. And so it's sort of a sharpening of the differences between things and then a sort of dissolving of the boundary between things. And I was trying to kind of work at both things with the book. And one of the challenges for me was writing with that first person I come from a pretty academic training, and the idea of putting a strong first person into my book took some work on my half,
Mhm.
and but it's kind of that artistic notion that the more specific you can be to yourself, the more universal it resonates
Mhm.
with others, hopefully at its best.
Yeah. I think that, to me, that speaks to some of the connection too, right? That personal is the
Mm.
universal in some ways, in so many ways. Um, yeah. So I've in that piece, I'll go back to that piece and want to see what you think about this, where I said Bill Plotkin talked about the collective we as he says it's an ascending journey. It's why we actually have more ministers and priests that are men than women. It's a masculine journey, he speaks of it. And then the descending journey to soul, he says, is a feminine journey. It's why we have more witches than warlocks. And one of the things I woke up with one morning was, oh, that the collective we in the spiritual walk is masculine, where the individual I of the spiritual walk is feminine, is held by the feminine. But the earthly walk is just the opposite. The collective we on earth is held by the feminine, and the individual I is held by the masculine. And I think it's actually how we find some balance between masculine and feminine and heaven and earth.
Mm,
What
mm,
does that speak to you?
mm. Yeah, that's really, really beautifully put. And I'll have to spend some time with how you reverse that at the
Yes.
end, because I like that. But when you're talking about ascendance being the we and the masculine, in some traditional cultures, it's Father Sky and Mother Earth. And so I get at that a bit in the book with my section on the mountains of the Bible. And particularly one essay in which there was a nearby little mountain that I could hike up and I could see the small church that I was serving off in the distance. And for me, the spiritual practice of hiking that mountain and taking in the landscape in that way was quite literally like showing you how things fit together, how um, this road connects this town to this town, how these hills create a wildlife corridor for these creatures to move, how this valley is ideal for the birds to migrate through. So I think there is quite a literal thing that by ascending we get a more panoramic view of the whole, of the all, and then descending into earth. One of the more powerful books I've read in the last few years is Underworld by Robert Macfarlane, which is all about kind of exploring what's under earth. And I don't quite go there in my book. My topics are on the surface or upwards, and all the way up to the clouds are in my book. So I have to think more about your question. But for me as a spiritual being, I do feel a strong resonance with both the masculine and feminine, and in such a way that for me, I tend not to maybe lean into them as very strong dualities. Um, uh, just a simple example, when many people meet me that know my parents but not me, they say, oh, you're a perfect blend of your mom and your dad. And I think that happens to so many of us. And so if that's the case, then you're a perfect blend in some sense of the matriarchal lineage and the patriarchal lineage. Um, and yeah, I feel that strongly. So I find them, useful concepts. But I personally don't lean too sharp into them as being totally different paths.
Yeah.
But that's, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't hold them totally separate at all. I think I think it's the like, where's the balance for all of us? I think, like you said, that the idea is that we have all of it in us, right? And that I think I found my experiences, I'm constantly trying to find where's the center of gravity now, or where's the center of gravity here, as life is changing and moving and taking me to different places. Um, so speaking of that, you mentioned, clouds. Can you speak a little bit about the four kind of sections that you have in your book, and tell us a little bit about each?
Sure. So the book arose. My first solo call was to a small church in rural Vermont, and I quickly realized when I got there that this was a congregation that was so attuned to nature, so attuned to the rhythms of the year, what's called the phenological calendar, when things happen on the landscape. And so I had a little realization. I would stand up and announce the lectionary calendar. Today is the first Sunday of Advent, or today is the fourth Sunday of Ordinary Time. And I would kind of think we were following the church calendar. And then during the joys and celebrations, they would always say, today I saw my first bluebird, meaning today's the first Sunday of true spring, or today I took a drive through the mountains and the fall colors were magnificent, meaning today is the first Sunday of the peak leaves, the leaf peepers visiting. So they quickly taught me that our journey was one of reading for the sacred in the calendar of nature as much as the calendar of the church. And so part of your call as a pastor is to, make the gifts of, in my case, the Christian spiritual lineage come alive and meet people where they are. It's a little bit the work of translation. And so I quickly realized that if I could find a way of lifting up and foregrounding the role that nature and the elements of nature play in these scriptures that we were turning to every week, that could be a real potentially powerful way to connect with where my people were. So the first summer we did a whole series on the birds of the Bible. That didn't make it into the book, but that was kind of the launching point, was the birds. And in that case, we got to partner with the local Audubon Society, an amazing field biologist and naturalist. Craig Zondag joined us for that journey. But from there, I sort of realized the Bible is so full of everything. And in rabbinical tradition, they say the Bible is a gem, and you have to turn it and turn it and turn it. And every time you turn it, more light will be reflected and refracted. So I thought, we've had a couple thousand years now of really focusing on the human characters and the human drama in the Bible. A real strong, I would call it an anthropocentric hermeneutic. And what if we were to really shake things up and really turn things in a dramatic way back towards the earth and towards the more than human world? So after the birds, I kind of got the idea to do this and based on the kind of classical element system, and different cultures have different ones. Um, but the next year we did a series on the trees of the Bible. That was right around when that wonderful book, The Hidden Life of Trees, came out. Peter Wohlleben, and all this new excitement about how communicative trees are and how interdependent they are, and the wood wide web and stuff like that. So we did trees of the Bible, and that quickly in my mind cohered with the earth element. And then in part it was just looking around my landscape in Vermont and like what's there. And like there were lots of trees, there was mountains, there were rivers and clouds. And so those ended up being the sections of the book. The rivers corresponding to the water element, the mountains to the fire element, which takes a little bit of explaining sometimes, but in the chapter I describe how there's fire in the belly of the earth and how that kind of leads to the different plate tectonics and volcanoes, and fire being kind of the cause of why there are mountains on the planet.
Yeah.
And then the last one, clouds, with the air element, which I have to say that, so you asked me about the clouds. That one was the one that I think had the most immediate impact on people, that I had my whole church staring at the clouds all summer long. and they loved it. They said they'd never paid so much attention to the sky, to what's above us. But it was also, from a creative perspective, the most difficult one. Clouds are such a fleeting, in the moment phenomenon of nature, and to be able to write about them, I think clouds are suited better to like plein air landscape painting. Being out there with a paintbrush and trying to capture it. So writing about them was a real good challenge. And I would say for every section, I had a wonderful experience, but also a daunting experience of kind of not feeling up to the task. Like how can I possibly capture the magnificent wisdom that trees have to offer us, or how can I possibly let the mountains, speak something through me, or the rivers or the clouds. So really kind of I get the butterflies even just thinking about it, trying to open myself up and be a conduit for these elements to be in conversation with, which I guess is the title of the book, Speak with the Earth. And just one more word about the title. So for me, it gets at, I've noticed as I look back over theology in particular, there's been a movement from dominion theology to stewardship theology. And now there's a movement towards what I would call relationship and reciprocity theology, which is the language of stewardship doesn't go far enough. It still places the human at the center of things. Whereas the language of relationship and reciprocity gets at more what the actual experience is of being a body here in nature, and dependent on all the other life forms and such. So that's been kind of the shift in my thinking, and I'm wanting to really linger and go deep in that relationship and reciprocity stage of things.
It's so interesting because as you were speaking, I was thinking about it's all about relationship. Even speaking about naming the cone flower, right? Like knowing the names, that's personal. It's a relationship, or the relationship to paying attention or being intentional about looking at the sky, right? Like it's about how do we be in relationship. And one of the things that I know about being in relationship, um, is that relationships often and always can give us more information about ourselves. It helps to grow us. In what ways, I know you've talked about kind of the shift in the movement and how, um, some of the ministry has moved. In what ways has the relationship, maybe with that church or with this book, has changed you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been an exciting change. I would say up until this book or the last few years at my Vermont church, I was very much, and maybe this is being part of the millennial generation, I was very much in kind of a student mode, a learning mode of life, kind of a sponge mode. And really taking on this project, even though it felt a little bit big and daunting for me, was a real kind of journey in finding my voice and finding um, the place where kind of my joy and passion intersects with some of the world's great hunger and need. Kind of finding, I like the metaphor of building a fire and seeing who else wants to come around your fire and be a part of that conversation. And this project was one of kind of an expedition into a little bit of an unknown territory, and then trying to say, okay, I've gotten here now, and now I'm gonna, build, find some sticks and build a little fire and see who wants to come be a part of this conversation. And it's simply one of many of the big, great conversations of our times. But yeah, I found it to be, I guess, an expansive thing. It gave me a sense that I have work to do that goes beyond the walls of a local church, and yeah, it helped me claim my place as part of the earth that is an opening of consciousness, that is a way through which the earth to reflect on itself, and that sort of thing. So I would say both, yeah, helped expand my sense of self, and then, as we were talking about at the beginning, maybe clarify sense of self a bit.
You know, you were saying who kind of this daunting task of writing this book, and what I heard in that when you were speaking to it is just a sense of reverence.
Mm.
I think that the things that so often that we're called and that are ours to do, there is a kind of, sometimes even a not wanting to do it. but but this when we know it's ours, like how can I possibly do that? Right.
Mm.
And there's some reverence in that, I think. I think
Mm.
there's reverence when we maybe feel it and continue to walk toward it, right? Because we can feel that and be paralyzed by it too is another kind of option on that journey. Yeah.
Mm. Mm.
Are there things that helped you to continue to walk toward it?
Mm. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, little simple things like very practically, I wasn't trained in writing, but I got to participate in a writing workshop at the Breadloaf Institute in Vermont on environmental writing in particular. So that helped me kind of being able to workshop what was very private and intimate with other people, um, was very helpful. But in part, it was, yeah, that sometimes difficult work of sticking in relationship, because I believe if I look at the clouds long enough, or if you look at the clouds long enough, or anybody opens themselves to the clouds long enough, then the meaning will come. You have to kind of be patient and stay in the relationship. Um, so so yeah, patience helped me. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe you could form that question a little
Yeah.
differently,
Yeah.
or we could see what
I'm
else.
just wondering what in your life sustains you and helps
Mm.
you to keep moving forward and feeds you, you know?
Mm. Mm. Yeah, well, one, I have been really interested in the question of how we as humans relate to the landscape. And I personally have been really enjoying the practice of foraging for wild edibles.
Mhm.
um, it's something I didn't necessarily grow up doing, but I started doing it actually when I was a student in Chicago, and there was a local park near us, Jackson Park, and I found my first morel mushrooms there, and I found wild onions, and that kind of has set me off on a real passion for the last 15 years, I would say. And so what the invitation is it's it's different than foraging, or different than gardening rather. I'm not plotting out where things are going to go, and I'm not, building a fence to keep the rabbits out. It's more an invitation to really be in that relationship and reciprocity with the created world. It brings me off trail, places that I wouldn't normally get, I think. And it does make me slow down and learn the names of things, learn the life cycle of things. It places you in a deep relationship of time. You have to know kind of when things are happening, and you have to find the right plant in the right place at the right time. And so it takes a lot of kind of being in attuned to the different rhythms of nature. Foragers have a saying, they say mushrooms are where you find them, which to me is kind of like the mystery of it. Like it's not, yeah, foraging relationship is real honoring the sort of the power of nature to be a little bit beyond us. So that's been something I've been pondering recently. And just the practice of it is deeply nourishing for me. I take my little 2.5-year-old Reverie out, and moving at her pace is a great way to move through the woods. um, she'll invite me just to marvel at the grasses or the ferns, and we'll sit down and just sit with them for a moment. And yeah, it touches into deep human psyche. I think we've been foragers and hunter-gatherers for so much longer than we have been cultivators and gardeners. And just to sort of encounter the world as truly more than human is what I find so significant. I do wonder about certain trends in our culture that become so insulated on the human perspective of things, and I think there's a real turning away from the joy and struggles that come with being a body in nature amidst other bodies in nature. And um, I hope our culture can find a way, rather than moving away from embodied incarnate experience, like with maybe chatbot. And I don't know, I don't want to get too down on technology,
Yes.
because here we are having a conversation and people get to tune in from anywhere at any time, which is amazing. But for me, I would be most excited to see us move towards even more fully embodied existence. And I would call it radical earth empathy, to feel with the earth, to feel as the earth. So the way that's been coming to me, I think a lot about the climate crisis, and it's just been a big part of my education and life growing up, environmental concern. And for our generation, it was big concepts like save and protect. We were supposed to it was Free Willy and save the whale, and it was Fern Gully and protect the forest. And it is sort of this, white savior complex of relating to nature in that way. And I've been more and more trying to think through to the place of, we don't save the earth saves us, when we remember that we belong to the whole of it. And that in part means feeling what the earth is feeling. And I think some of the climate anxiety and kind of eco grief is because we're feeling what the forests in California feel when the wildfires approach. We're feeling, there's this new term, species loneliness. We're feeling the loneliness of the white rhino that faces extinction. Or a new term, solastalgia. It's similar to nostalgia. Rather than longing for a different time and place, solastalgia means longing for what your own time and place, your own homeland has become after being ecologically altered and changed. So I do want to draw close to that sort of thinking and those sorts of feelings that are present in our culture. And I think the only way out is through. The only way is feeling the loneliness of the rhino, not retreating from it and focusing only on ourselves. So that's in part what I was trying to get at with this book too, opening to the more than human world. Philosopher David Abram has a wonderful short little quote. He says, "We're human only in contact and conviviality with what is other than human." And I love that phrase, contact and conviviality. Or I think I've been thinking my little Reverie has a wonderful way of putting it herself. She has a 3-part greeting for everything: trees, birds, people. She says, "Hello, And then she says, "What's your name?" And then she says, "Let's be friends."
I love that. One of the things I think you're talking about, being able to feel for the white rhino or feel those things. And I think one of the things is um, we don't feel those things for ourselves. Like, we don't really get that nature is synonymous for the soul. Like that we are not going out into nature. We are nature. We are a part of nature, we're connected. Um, and this piece around like I am often looking for what's life-giving and life affirming. We so often will look for people to give what they don't have. I would say that quote, love thy neighbor as thyself. We don't love ourselves. And so for me, some of it is how do we um, cultivate more and more opportunities and nature, it often gets triggered in nature because nature is synonymous for the soul. So often if someone's going on a spiritual journey, there's something in nature uh that like takes them and lights them up, and it can be as simple as inner city, a flower on a, uh, on a fire escape or something. It doesn't have to be out in the middle of the redwoods, even though it can be. So that piece about nature and how it brings us to ourselves, I think
Mm,
is
mm.
important.
Yeah, that's really important. A couple of things come to mind. I love your phrase, nature synonymous with the soul. For me, there's a famous quote that has meant something similar to that for some time now, which is the modernist artist Jackson Pollock, famous for all those big splatter paintings. He was once asked, why don't you paint? Why doesn't your painting represent nature in any way, like most uh, paintings in museums represent nature? And he just said, "I don't paint nature. I am nature." And so it's that sort of, yeah, identifying yourself as nature. Um, and yeah, loving the self. It makes me think of one of the real powerful points that thinkers like Robin Wall Kimmerer have been um, showing us. She talks about it as, we all have this desire to love the earth and to care for the earth. But she asks, have you ever experienced the fact that the earth loves you?
Yeah.
And it's feeling that reciprocity, that love. The earth loves you through the way the air is moving in the through the trees to the air. The earth loves you through, whatever you ate for breakfast that sustained you. It's strawberry season here in Wisconsin, so the earth has been loving my little family through the delicious taste of strawberries. And um, I think, yeah, feeling that I think can help with the love yourself as your neighbor. And I think we need positive visions. Like we are here on this earth for a reason. We have gifts we can bring to the earth and to creation. And I think there's so much kind of feeling of shame at being human, um, but we have a role to play in the well-being of the world, and we need to all be doing the work of figuring out what that is and encouraging one another along that way. And I think part of that is, yeah, feeling loved. I think the same thing happens at church. I think many people might go to church on Sunday morning out of a sense of duty, like, oh, I've got to go love God now. Whereas what they really need to hear is the old truth that God loves them, God loves you, and it takes some vulnerability to let that love kind of come back to you. Um, but for me recently, that's been a key
I,
concept to lean into.
I work with a lot of pastors, and one of the things that someone said once, and I've been using with some of the groups that I've been with, is this difference between discipline and discipleship. You're talking about coming to church. Are we going because out of discipline or discipleship? Discipleship is what do I love enough that I can
Mm,
keep showing up time and time again,
mm,
that
mm,
I want to show up. And
mm,
I also, have heard the question around like, we can be grateful for the earth and the things that we're given, but is the earth grateful for us? Like, what
mm,
are we doing that would make the earth happy that we're here, right? Like,
Mhm.
to have that question for myself, like, how am I how am I showing some reciprocity for the gratitude and love that I feel that I'm getting from the earth, you know?
Mm, mm.
In what ways do I do that?
Yeah, I really love that question as just a daily wake up and put it on your heart type question. Yeah, what can I do today to help make the earth grateful for my presence? Similar to the question of, how to be a good ancestor, that sort of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, I love that. And I think part of the terrain I want to be moving towards is, I think, particularly with something as large as kind of environmental concern and the climate crisis. I just think we're so lacking of like what a beautiful vision for human presence on the earth looks like, or what a beautiful vision for how we relate to one another, relate to um, other species. And I think it's there obviously in lots of our ancient knowing, but I think when we face, just thinking about the wildfire smoke of this year, and just as we face the present kind of reality, we get we don't want to face the reality because we can't picture a more beautiful way. And so I don't have the vision yet, but I want to be part of conversations that help cast, a more beautiful vision for being human on this planet.
I one of the things that I'm taken with is the whales, and they've been uh showing up all kinds of places in my life recently. They were around one of my animal loves when I was younger, and they've come back. And I was in a conversation recently about how, during COVID, when all the cruise ships stopped um going, there was this they were able to track, like, that these whales, some of the whales can communicate all the way to the other side of the earth through the water, through their signals and their, what we can't hear as humans. But that one of the things that happened for the whales is that they could go further out to feed because they have to leave their babies behind, and then they would go out and they could go further because they could hear if the babies needed them to come back. But with the cruise ships, because it interrupts the sound, they can't go as far out. And so many of the whales are just starving because they can't get
Mm,
the food
mm,
that's needed,
yeah.
and just that, how do, I'm in this question, I guess, and it's not really one that I think we can answer right today, but this question about how do we become more and more aware of the impact that we have on people, things, the earth around us. Like, what are even some practices that can help us be more present and intentional around those things.
Mm, mm, mm. Yeah, no, I love those reflections. Um, it makes me think this was long before the pandemic, but about a dozen years ago, there was an article that has stuck with me about whales also. I think it was in the New York Times, and it was about how um, humans stopped when humans stopped hunting whales. This was, I think, off the coast of Mexico, the Baja side. Um, Shortly after we stopped hunting the whales would come up to the ships and visit the people, and even let the people kind of touch them. And there was a sense that um, the whales obviously knew that our behavior changed, and then they were responding with kind of an act of forgiveness.
Yeah.
And I think it's just, those sorts of moments, like realizing that, how our changes and transformations we make can, will have a ripple effect. And the whales will notice if we do things differently. The monarch butterflies will notice if we do things differently. Um, so just, yeah, just honoring that we are part of a highly sentient world, and the other creatures and life forms are fully aware of what we're doing and are fully capable of responding when we make changes.
Yeah, as in all relationships, right? Relationships. Is there anything in the book that you really want people to know about? Like anything specific or anything that we haven't touched on?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would just want to say that it's intention is really to be more than a book about the Bible. It's really to be a book about kind of the wonder and glory of being a body in nature and trying to make sense of the meaning of it all, and trying to put what I hope the book does is put words to experiences that we all know, which are encountering a sense of the sacred, um, and a sense of meaning in nature. And so I would hope people that are not part of the Christian tradition or whatever would still find something in it. Um, yeah, well, just to go back, you mentioned I liked your mention of the term disciple and discipleship. Just one concept I would leave people with in the water section, in the river section. Um, a theologian named Ched Myers has come up with a whole concept called watershed discipleship.
Mm-hmm.
And by that, he means at least three things. He means, watershed as like a change, a big moment of change, a big moment of change in history. We're at a watershed moment. And he means watershed just literally being the landscape that you live in. And I've heard it put the watershed as like a report card on the whole landscape. So paying attention to how our rivers are doing and is really a key indicator for how our land is doing. And then discipleship. Yeah, he talks about that as discipleship means being a student. So being a student of place, being a student of the place in which you live. And that's been something I've been just trying to do more and more as I go on in my life. Trying to, yeah, really honor, nature as mentor, like the tree as the spiritual director, and be in that sort of discipleship relationship with the life forms in your landscape, and that's available to all of us. We talked about clouds. Clouds are the most egalitarian thing in the world. Anybody can look up and be in an intentional relationship with the clouds. So yeah, I guess the general invitation of the book um, is just to be again a student in relationship to the earth, learn from life, um, treat the forms of life as guru, as spiritual director, as guide.
Yeah. I find the book very spiritual, and even though it uses the Bible as a lens to go through, to me, it is a book about the earth. It's a book about being in relationship with the earth. And like I said, nature to me is synonymous with the soul, so it's not surprising that we can use the Bible as a lens for that, right? Um, and I also, one of the things when you're speaking about this piece about being in relationship, one activity that I give to our fire and water people is just even the first step is learn where your water comes from. Like the water that comes out of your
Mm-hmm.
drinking faucet. Like even just taking that step, do you know where the water comes from that you're drinking every day? And I think that, just even that step starts something. It starts a curiosity because I think we don't even think about, oh, I don't know where my water comes from, right? I just
Yeah.
take it for granted. And so that's one task that I would challenge people with.
Yeah, I love that. And I love just you're so right that once we start to think along those lines, the curiosity is just piqued and we just, go from one thing to the next. So in my book, for example, there was a big river that went right by my church. And one day I was just thinking about to myself, I'm like, where does this river begin? I didn't know. And hadn't heard anybody talking about it um, or things like that. So I literally traced the line on a map and pulled off the side of the road and hiked up the side of the mountain trying to find where this river actually began. And it was one of the most exciting things I've done in a while. And just to it all just, yeah, where does your water come from in your tap? Where does the river that flows through your landscape, where does it begin? What other waters does it join up with after that? How have humans interacted with those waters over history? What other species live there? Yeah, it just
Yeah.
curiosity leads to curiosity.
Yes. And how much life there is outside, right?
Mhm.
Like I say outside the real reality TV, right? Reality show is out there. And there's so much. I mean, I think that when we really pay attention to know how much is happening, and even a small place, I was at the park this weekend and I was listening to my cousin was playing music, but just even sitting on the ground in the park, seeing how much even just the insects around or the kids, or I mean, there's just so much. The trees, there's this big, like, grandmother tree that had all this kind of twist and turns in the branches, and just like how much there is to be with, that I think that we've forgotten in our speed. Like, we just go, 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 but we don't realize that pace really is quite violent often. Yeah.
Mm-mm.
Mm.
Just to pick up on that real quick, yesterday was a Sunday, and I was invited to be a guest preacher about an hour away from where I live. And I've been recently studying and getting trained in this method called wild church. It's yeah, gathering in a circle around a fire outside. Anyway, rather than a sermon, there's a moment of intentional wandering and being in intentional relationship with the landscape. And I went over to a bridge and looked down, and there was a small little trout just facing upstream, but looking like it wasn't even moving. And I had that exact same thought that you had, which is the trout sits there and the food comes to it, comes to the trout. And here I am driving all over the place, going left and right and up and down, and um, trying to accomplish the same thing that this trout is doing with such kind of composed ease. It was
Yeah.
really quite amazing. Yeah.
Mm. Well, what a joy to be in this conversation with you, Daniel. I love the idea and even had to touch on the wild church piece for you. But I'll ask it in this way. So what do you think is next for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have been starting to experiment and play with yeah, just a new expression, a new way of being church, which has been going by the name Wild Church. There's a Wild Church network that's starting to form, but very much kind of an emergent network. And so, yeah, I've been studying the forms of that. It's very similar to some of the circle work type way of being together. And I've been really enjoying that. So I do plan to start a Wild Church, maybe even two. um, because there are a couple different landscapes that I love. And so part of it is Wild Church would be a real kind of expression of the landscape church. The invitation is not to just do indoor church in an outdoor setting, not just to worship in nature, but to worship with nature,
Mm.
to open yourself to the land and the sky and the birds. So what I've been doing is while I build the fire and get everything set up, I had my phone going with that Merlin bird app, which can
Mhm.
listen and tell you all the bird species, which is so incredible.
Yes.
And then as like a call to worship, I just, invoke all the names of the different birds that have already been giving us the prelude for that day. So that will be something, writing this book confirmed my sense of call to be a writer, to write. So that'll be part of what I want to try to offer to the world. Um, but yeah, I don't know. We'll see. It's kind of an open-ended moment for me, which is quite exciting.
It's exciting to think of also being able to at some point um have access to reading your piece around the birds that was left out of the book.
Mm.
That seems exciting, especially for me. I'm a bird watcher. I love,
Mm,
going out and watching and listening and knowing the different bird songs, and so that just piqued my interest.
mm.
Yeah. Um, well,
Good, good.
thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Um, any last words? Anything that you want to speak?
I just want to, yeah, just speak my gratitude. So such a joy to get to, think these thoughts aloud with you, and be guided with your wonderful questions and presence. Um, so yeah, I've been looking forward to this, and just my heart is full being having this time with you. So thank you.
Thank you. I've been looking forward to it too. You tend to be such a quiet person that it's nice to be able to have a time that's set aside where we can be in conversation with each other and I can get to know you a little bit better too and share you with the people that I know and to share this book again, Speak with the Earth, and it will teach you a field guide to the Bible. And so we will have contact information and stuff when we post this episode so people can reach out and find where you are and what you're up to. Thank you, Daniel.
Wonderful. Thank you, Juanita.